All right, welcome everybody. This is Axel Merk, President Chief Investment Officer of Merk Investments, with my morning update, a little later than usual. That's sometimes not so bad because markets are moving. Much of the world is celebrating socialism. Historically, they're out on the streets and celebrating the great communist labor movement in the world. Today, in most countries, they are celebrating with some online videos instead of being on the streets. And usually, it's a big bashing of big business. What's interesting is this time around, big business actually not being thrown under the bus, so to speak. This time around, the big unions are praising the bailouts of big business because they're preserving jobs, and so just a sign of the times we live in. Let me give you just a quick market rundown before I touch on a few topics. S&P futures are down 69, so down after some tech companies have given cautionary notes, and bonds, the 10 years up 4 ticks, the 30-year is up 13 ticks, a little bit stronger. The 3-month LIBOR rate is at 69 basis points. Since I started doing this, we've come down quite a bit. The 1 month, 4-week Treasury is at 7 basis points, and the Fed funds effective rate is at 4 basis points. And so the spread here between the 3-month LIBOR rate is the intrabank lending rate on the 3-month basis, and that has been coming down, so it's healing. Then the VIX curve continues to be inverted, or is inverted again. It was hovering to be up and down. The VIX is currently at 37 or so, and so the VIX curve is whether fear, so to speak, is a more normal, that the future is more or less certain than the present, and in a panic environment, you are fearful now and more certain in the future. We're still in panic mode, or again in panic mode, not dramatically so, but it's worthwhile that things haven't normalized. Now, gold, as I'm looking here, has had a little bit of a turnaround. Gold is now up $10 in the spot market, up 60 basis points, or up $13 at 1707 in the futures, and then 1696 in the spot market. So what I like to talk about here a little bit is a few things. Mostly maybe is yesterday, Wells Fargo came out and said they are not going to issue any more HELOCs, home equity lines of credits, not new ones. So if you have an existing home line of equity line of credit, that I haven't heard. I don't think they're canceled. But if you're applying for a new one, they are not going to do that. And apparently, JP Morgan has said similar things of late. And so the home for many people is kind of their reserve emergency cash piggy bank, but it is a subordinate loan, meaning your mortgage comes first and then the HELOC. And so if you default on your HELOC, you have to get in line as a creditor. And so it's a riskier business in an economic downturn. And so they've decided temporarily, at least, to get out of this business. At the same time, Fannie Mae announced that they are, and I'm looking down the screen, Wells is a public company, and so is Fannie. Fannie is actually publicly traded on the equity side, even though it is all government guaranteed pretty much. So I'm giving you this disclosure here that that none of this investment recommendation, but about 7% of the home loans outstanding are currently, and let me just give you the precise wording here because I don't want to misrepresent it. So let me just pull this up here as I speak. But in any case, a lot of people obviously are not paying their mortgages right now. And here, Fannie Mae estimates that approximately 7% of loans in its single-family guarantee book of business were in a forbearance plan as of April 30th. So one has to be precise about these things. Don't want to cause more undue stress, but obviously delinquencies are going to be on the rise. Those of you who follow our chart books, and we'll pitch for them, merkinvestments.com/research, you can get chart books that we publish. Know that we follow delinquencies and have been over time. And some of you have noticed that the charts that we follow hadn't shown that sort of uptick ahead of this the virus outbreak than some others had. And the reason is that we always have been looking and look at the overall delinquencies, which means we include mortgages in it, whereas the more sensitive indicators might be just looking at credit card or auto loans or others. And those obviously had shown some uptick before, but the big elephant in the room is the home mortgage market. And so if the home mortgage market is under stress, that is something that's obviously has going to have a much bigger impact on consumer spending going forward. And so again, for those of you who've been thinking about a V-shaped recovery, kind of forget it. Um, so then had some discussions. We That's part of the reason I have this briefing later is we have a regular discussions with our senior economic advisor, um, Bill Poole, the former St. Louis Fed president, and then our team. And I certainly don't want to put any words into his mouth, so please don't quote any of what I say here and attribute it to him. But one of the challenges about we talked about the kind of the popular backlash that might come of things, and the challenge is that there is no good definition of what is right. Right? It's in the eye of the beholder and can be highly politicized. So that's just I'll just leave it at that. Um, then, since I have the microphone here, let me just go on a brief rant on regulations. Government has said they slash all kinds of regulations, and clearly that's the case on the vaccine approval and medication approval. But in our industry, we just this week got notice from an administrator that one of the fees is going up because of a new regulation that's just causing a lot more work than expected. And internally, we also spend a lot more time complying with this rule, which is really, well, it's a nice rule, but that really doesn't make anybody any safer with regard to our business. And then, sure enough, last night I got another notice from another service provider that they're going to increase their fees for another rule that's going to come into effect this summer. And that one, let me expand because some of the folks listening are investment advisors and they are subject to the same rule. And so, as investment professionals knows, there is this thing called Form ADV. This is kind of where once a year you provide a long list of everything about your business. And that used to be the main thing. And then there used to be a supplement, part two, that had a few checkboxes about how your business works. Well, part one has gotten hugely complicated and nobody can actually understand anymore what it actually means, to some of the stuff. Part two, where it was supposed to be a more plain English thing, it's called brochure, has become a legal document, a very big one for many businesses. And guess what? They're introducing a part three, a consumer summary thereof. It's like the summaries prospectus for mutual funds some time ago, and it's just ridiculous that rather than simplifying the other forms, you're coming up with yet another interpretation of the other interpretations, and then anybody should be surprised why the cost of business going up. And obviously, what regulation does in general, it increases the cost of doing business. And so you could, of course, argue that, especially in our field, maybe it's right that not everybody can join. But it's the same thing. I mean, we complain about social media companies, right? The big social media companies actually would love to have regulations because it cements their leadership position. And so it's similarly, not anybody can go into the drug development business, and then maybe there's a good reason for that. But one has to be aware of these unintended consequences. And if we want to have an economic recovery that's fast, you have to slash regulations. I mean, in California, you need to take exams before you can be a hairdresser. Now, my guess is that there are lots of amateur hairdressers these days, people cutting their own hair or their spouses or significant others' hair. But no, it's a licensing requirement. Every job is licensed, and you need to take exams and whatnot. And in a highly developed society, maybe there are good reasons for that. But if you want to get unemployment down, you want to cut people some slack. And obviously this goes in all kinds of areas, right? I mean, there's a reason for it. If you deal with other people's money, there's a reason why there are people out there to try to protect the investor. And similarly, in the health side, there's a reason for these things. I mean, laws usually come into place because there's abuse or perceived abuse of something. And then there's a balance to be struck. How much do you allow consumers to decide and how much you want to protect them? Those are all fair debates. But of course, our lawmakers, they're called lawmakers for a reason because they introduce new laws. They are not called something like remove lawmakers, right? The efficiency of a Congress is decided about how many new laws and regulations that they pass. And and then a new administration comes in and says, yes, for every new law that we pass, we're getting rid of 2 or 3 old laws or whatever it is. Um, I just have never ever felt any of these regulations come off the book, and so it's just a reminder that some of the stuff is interesting. Anyways, um, back here to the market. If I look at my screen, I didn't mention the oil market because it's only up 1.5%, 28 cents at $19 and 13, 14, 15 cents here as I speak. That's West Texas. West ICE Brent crude is at 26.20. It's actually down 1%, and so that market is more in line. There was some Bloomberg, some talk about this morning about the major oil companies, how some of them are trying to preserve the dividend. Again, not investment recommendation, but about what they do, and then specifically we asked, well, why don't they acquire some of the companies in distress? And the answer by the fellow who was interviewed said, well, because they're not bankrupt yet. Might as well, why overpay, right? Let's have them run against the wall and pick up the assets on the cheap. Why pay 100 cents on these bonds and or take on these obligations? Might as well wait until things get renegotiated and take things over then. Um, and so there's going to be a lot more happening in that space. Other than that, um, more coverage, as you're aware, I often cite Germany on what's happening here. The Wall Street Journal has picked up on that theme now, asking and wondering why in Germany the outcomes appear to be better than in many other places. And the first one is they appear to have been lucky that young people were getting sick more than the elderly. That's changing here a little bit. The average age has moved up significantly, mostly because people got sick in the ski resorts. And so those obviously tend to be younger people on average, at least. And then there are just more hospital beds. There is the other thing that's helpful is it's more apolitical. It's as everybody's aware, things get politicized here very quickly. And so that, of course, helps in the response rate. But it's still, we have real-time experiments going on around the globe, and we can negotiate and talk ad nauseum probably which system is better or not. It doesn't help us so much because ultimately we're stuck with the system we have locally in whichever state you are, in whichever country you may be listening in. And so I'm based here in California in Santa Clara County, and the the rules are supposed to be eased starting Monday, but there's a lot of confusion even now. We got the main counties here in the Bay Area that have their own set of rules. They have the state rules, and they're going back and forth. I have a friend who is an avid tennis player, and he doesn't know whether he can play tennis or not. In some towns you're allowed to, in others you cannot. And and Obviously, the focus should be on a rational discussion on how we can get people back to work. And one of the big concerns out there is that the testing capacity is still not where it should be. The capacity is improving, but the capacity is not being utilized. Testing centers are empty or at least significantly below capacity. There is no real strategy. There's a test out. You can now order online a antibody test by Quest. Again, no investment recommendation here. I looked at that. They don't disclose which one of the tests that they're using, antibody tests, and there are a good dozen, I think 13 or so of these tests around. About 10 of them are supposed to be useless. Now, the Quest test is more expensive than the other ones, than many of them, and but they don't say which underlying test they're using, presumably because they want to keep the flexibility to change things. But imagine you take one of these tests, and then you go somewhere and says, oh yeah, I've been tested and I have antibodies. And I said, which test did you take? I said, I don't know. It says, I mean, how good is that, right? And so there's some, now, will those things be fixed and addressed? Sure. But when you live in the middle of it, it's a bit unnerving, of course, that there's a little guidance. And so what I can only tell people is that, hey, you got to, just like with investments, you got to make up your own mind where you are, where you want to be, and how to get there. And so there's also not going to be a switch that people can flip and all this stuff is going to be over. Different states deal with this differently, and there will be a second wave in some states, almost certainly. That's just because you lock up for a while and then go back out, it's not going to fix things, right? We need to have new processes in place, and so there's going to be a new environment. And so we got to figure out what to do, and it's just speaking for myself here, right? We have 4 children. Some of them are out of the house. One of them is back home from college and taking remote classes, and then we have a younger one, same mom, same dad, 12-year-old, and she's doing great, online dance, online everything, but she is of course stuck at home most of the time. Only one person is supposed to go to the supermarket, so she's stuck at her desk almost the entire day. Sure, she goes out for a walk, but the psychological toll on youngsters is tremendous. And so also when people say, hey, I'm bored at home, well, I've been never as busy. Aside from managing business and private life, there's the mental health management of employee, family, friends, and whatnot, right? Touch base with your friends. They most appreciate it. I reached out to folks. And then today, for example, would have been a fantastic conference that I love going to every year, the Hoover Monetary Conference. And some of you may remember I tend to tweet live from it. But of course, that was canceled, right? So reaching out to the organizers, saying, hey, would have been great to be there. They appreciate that, right? People appreciate the personal touch. Any case. As I speak here, it's Friday, so that's usually a newsworthy event because people are squaring their books on whatever they have done during the week. In a week from today, we will get the non-farm payroll report, which is going to be very dismal. And so let's see what's going to come. As you may notice, and if you look at the headlines, the headlines will follow what the market is doing, not lead what the market is doing. And what that means basically is that today, if the market closes where we are, there will be kind of glass half empty talk until yesterday. It was the big move for kind of the month and so forth. The glass was more half full, but let the market be down for a few days, and then everybody's going to talk about how dire the situation is. And then let the market be up for a few days, and that's everybody be amazed of how the printing presses out in the world are moving up these markets. I mean, clearly we got these two forces: fiscal and monetary response versus the V turning into an L-shaped recovery. And so there will be an argument for good and bad, and the biggest reference point everybody has is of course 2009, where people were critical of the recovery, and then for over 10 years the market was going up and up and up and up, and so nobody wants to be caught late here. But that doesn't mean history repeats itself in that sense, right? And so anybody just has to think of themselves of what they want to do and will do. So with that, everybody have a great weekend and stay safe out there, and talk to you soon. Bye.